Welcome on back to Skippers. Today we have 4 players that you need to avoid on your fantasy baseball teams this season. Before we get into it, I understand that everyone has a certain value at ADP. They can outperform that as well, but these are just 4 guys that I think their ADPs are too high and I do not want to take them where they are going. Before I get into the video, don't forget to subscribe. We're on the road to 30,000 subscribers and we have a ton more preseason content coming your way. Let's get into the players. The first player I'm going to avoid at his ADP is going to be Dansby Swanson of the Cubs. He is an ADP of 74. Last season, 277 average. 25 home runs, 96 RBIs, 18 stolen bases, and a 776 OPS. Dansby Swanson comes off a career year. He was awesome all throughout last season, and he decided to put himself in a much worse situation in free agency. The first negative change when it comes to Dansby Swanson has to deal with park factor. Park factor at its simplest is the difference between runs scored at home and runs scored on the road for teams. Last season for right-handed hitters, Truist Park was top 9 in park factors, and Wrigley Field was bottom 5 in the league for right-handed hitters. I really think a lineup change is going to hurt Dansby Swanson this season, and he's a guy who's going to manufacture runs, and if he doesn't have the people behind him to drive him in, the runs aren't going to happen, and it's going to be all for naught. The Cubs only have one player projected for a weighted runs created plus of over 120, and that is Seiya Suzuki, and Dansby Swanson comes from a Braves team that had 6 different guys with a weighted runs created plus over that number last season. Dansby Swanson is coming from a team that had 101 wins last season to a Cubs team that is projected to win only 75 games. When you're going to lose 26 less games than you won the season before, teams are going to pitch at you differently. When you're down in games versus when you're up in games, you're pitching different people out of the bullpen. Against the Braves, if you're down every time against the Braves, you're not pitching your top guys in high leverage situations because you just don't have them. And if teams are beating up on the Cubs, they're ahead on the Cubs, they're going to throw their top guys against Dansby Swanson. Again, it's not a ton of at-bats against top guys, but I think he's going to see a lot more top guys this season now that he's on the Cubs. Tougher matchups for Dansby Swanson as well. For a guy that's going to create runs at the top of the lineup, he does it in a very different way, very hit-heavy, and not a lot of getting on base from walks. He had 31 more base hits last season than his previous high, and he played 2 more games, 162 versus 160 the year before, and ran a very high batting average on balls in play. He had a walk rate only in the 36th percentile, and that put him on the same plane in OBP-wise as guys like Jerkson Profar and Jake Cronenworth, while he hit nearly 40 points better than both of them. Although I think Dansby's a really good contributor, I'm going to pass on taking him in the top 75. I think we'd be taking him at his peak, which he kind of did last season. I don't think he's going to replicate those numbers this season. The second guy I do not like at his ADP is going to be Joe Ryan of the Twins, an ADP of 138. Last season, 13-8, 3.55 ERA, 151 strikeouts, 110 WHIP, in 147 innings. Joe Ryan comes off a season where he had the same amount of wins as guys like Garrett Cole, Brandon Woodruff, and Shane Bieber, which was tied for 7th best in the majors, and I don't think he is nearly close as talented as those guys. And a lot of the underlying stats did not love what Joe Ryan did last season, so I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into those. Joe Ryan threw a 4-seam fastball that only averages 92 miles an hour, which ranks him 153rd amongst major league starters, and a 34th percentile spin rate. Somehow he had a really good string strike rate against and average against. Don't really know how that happened. Last season, he had a ground ball percentage of only 27.7% with a relatively low batting average on balls in play against. I feel like he defied the odds somehow of getting people out. He just found a way to do it nonstop and had great numbers, but I'm betting on him not to be able to back them up this season. Ryan had a barrel percentage in the 27th percentile last season and a chase rate in the 33rd percentile and had an xFIP north of 4.3. Of the 4 offerings that Joe Ryan threw last season, his slider, changeup, and curveball all returned positive run values for hitters, and his fastball had an expected slug nearly 75 points higher than his actual numbers. Again, I'm kind of baffled by how Joe Ryan was so good last year, and I think the numbers are telling you that he should regress, and I don't like him drafted as a top 40 pitcher this season. The third guy I don't love at his ADP is going to be Cedric Mullins of the Orioles. He's going off the board as the 47th player. He had a 258 average last season, 16 home runs, 64 runs batted in, and 34 stolen bases. He's an elite stolen base guy, 34. Nothing I can say about that. He's really good at stealing bases in your Roto League. You love to look at steals. And I think with some of the rule changes, though, that allow some guys who had maybe 10 stolen bases who will steal a lot more and be more willing to grab bags. But there's some guys who can get more bags, get into the 15s, that are going to have a much better OBP, way more home runs, and way more RBIs than Cedric Mullins. And I think it'll outweigh the reasons you want to be taking him that early in your drafts. Eric Cross had a great tweet where he had some fun with the ATC projections on Fangraphs. He looked at projections between 2 players. Player A, 637 plate appearances. He was going to slash 252, 318, and 413 with 84 runs, 19 home runs, 62 runs batted in, and 28 stolen bases. And then player B, had 595 plate appearance, 257 average, 325 on base, 415 slug with 69 runs, 15 home runs, 70 runs batted in, and 27 stolen bases. The ADP of these two players, Cedric Mullins is A at 47, and then Jake McCarthy is B at 126. I think this just kind of reiterates that you can find skill sets like Cedric Mullins much deeper in your drafts. And you picked up Cedric Mullins off waivers in week 1 of 2021. I think there can be some guys that do that as well this season. Cedric Mullins returned a run value of -1 against fastballs last season and had an expected weighted on base average, expected batting average, expected slug and barrel percentage all under the 25th percentile. I think that the 30-30 thing is going to be the outlier for Mullins. Obviously the 30 bases is something he replicated, but the 30 home runs went away. And pitchers have found a way to get him out in his next season without nothing drastically changing at Camden Yards for the power numbers to go down that way. I mean, if you're a right-handed hitter, left field obviously changed significantly, but right field did nothing. If you like the Cedric Mullins skill set, I think there are two left-handed hitting outfielders on the same team in Arizona, and Jake McCarthy and Corbin Carroll, that could very well replicate what Cedric Mullins can do and at a much later ADP. And the final guy is going to be Tristan McKenzie of the Guardians. He's ADP of 88. Last season, 11-11, 2.96 ERA, 190 strikeouts, 0.95 whip, and 191 in a third innings pitch. He's going off the board as the 28th ranked starting pitcher, and I think there are better values around this ADP like Luis Severino, Logan Webb. Tristan McKenzie was incredible last season. There's nothing else you can say about it, but I think we're drafting him at his best at this number and at this ADP, and I think he was just helped out by a pitcher-friendly ballpark and great defense last season to make these numbers so good. What I think helped drive Tristan McKenzie's success last season was dropping his walks per 9 from 435 to 207. He had really run a low batting average on balls in play in his career, due for some regression, of course, and I think we might finally see that. McKenzie was throwing his fastball over 55% of the time last season, and it returned a hard contact rate in the 37th percentile and a ground ball rate in the 31st percentile. I think giving up so many fly balls on your fastballs was only helped because he pitched at Progressive Field, which helped that fly ball percentage not hurting him as bad as it could have, but I don't want to bank on him being that lucky again this season. The numbers on the only two other Tristan McKenzie offerings are drastically different. He's one of the best curveballs among starters in all of baseball and just a piss-poor slider. Tristan McKenzie has a really tough time getting swings and misses on his sliders as it ranks close to the bottom in hard contact percentage, average against, and called strike and whiff percentage. If hitters were smart, we'd lay off on that slider and just sit 2 pitches on Tristan McKenzie. You see the fastball down out of the hand and the curveball up out of the hand. I think it would be better for the hitters on that. And you look at the steamer projections, which I like to look at, I think are the best ones. Tristan McKenzie is going 11-11 with a 4.10 ERA and a 4.13 FIP according to Steamer. Yes, Tristan McKenzie is super talented, but I think we see some regression that year. The fly ball numbers were just too bad and he didn't get hurt enough, so I'm going to take some other options around that ADP. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. Let me know what you think of these 4 players I do not love at their ADPs. Make sure you subscribe for some more preseason content, and I'll see you guys next time.